The morning bell hadn't even rung yet when Caleb Turner arrived at Roosevelt High, just like he had every morning for the past 17 years. His hands, rough and calloused from decades of scrubbing floors, turned the key in the janitor's closet. With practiced ease. The school was quiet at this hour, just the way he liked it. No laughing students shoving past him in the halls. No teachers barely glancing up as he emptied their trash bins. Just the familiar creak of the old wooden floors under his worn work boots and the smell of industrial cleaner mixing with the crisp morning air. Caleb moved through the empty corridors like a ghost, his mop gliding over scuff marks left by careless teenagers the day before. He knew every inch of this school, every stubborn stain in the cafeteria, every loose floorboard near the science wing, every locker that stuck when the weather turned humid. But none of the students knew him, not really. To them, he was just the janitor, a silent figure in a gray uniform, who appeared like clockwork to clean up their messes. If they had bothered to look closer, they might have noticed the way his left shoulder dipped slightly when he walked, an old injury from a fall he took in a jungle half a world away. They might have seen the faint scars peeking out from beneath his collar when he bent to pick up a discarded soda can. But teenagers rarely notice things like that. And Caleb never offered the stories behind them. The school was buzzing with excitement that morning. A special assembly had been called. A 4-star general was coming to speak about leadership and patriotism. Banners hung from the rafters of the gymnasium, and the marching band practiced their entrance for the 3rd time. Students chattered excitedly, their voices bouncing off the polished floors. Caleb worked quietly in the background, wiping down chairs and straightening rows. He kept his head down, his movements efficient. He wasn't part of the spectacle. He never was. The general arrived with a crisp uniform and a chest full of medals that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The principal greeted him with a firm handshake and a too loud laugh, leading him to the stage like a prized trophy. Caleb watched from the edge of the gym, leaning slightly on his mop. The general's voice boomed through the speakers as he spoke of courage, sacrifice, and the unseen battles soldiers carried home with them. Caleb listened, but the words felt distant, like echoes from another lifetime. He had heard speeches like this before. They never quite captured the truth. The weight of a rifle in your hands, the smell of damp earth and gunpowder, the way silence could be the loudest sound in the world. When you were waiting for the enemy to move, he was about to slip out before the applause he always did when something made him pause. The general had stopped mid-sentence. The gymnasium, once buzzing with restless energy, fell eerily quiet. Caleb turned dot and found the general staring directly at him. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, with deliberate steps, the general descended. From the stage, the students whispered, confused, as he crossed the gym floor, not toward the principal, not toward the honored guests in the front row, but toward the janitor standing near the exit. Caleb's grip tightened on the mop handle. The general stopped a foot away. His voice, when he spoke, was low but carried through the stunned silence. Sergeant Caleb Turner. The name hung in the air. Like a detonation, Caleb hadn't been called that in decades. Not since the war. Not since the jungle. The general's hand rose in a sharp, unwavering salute. Sir, it is an honor. The gymnasium froze. Students who had never given Caleb a second glance gaped. Teachers who had walked past him for years without a word stood slack-jawed. The principal's face drained of color. One teacher, her voice trembling, broke the silence. "But he's just the janitor." The general didn't lower his salute. His eyes never left Caleb's. "He's not just anything," he said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "This man carried more in one night than most of us will. In a lifetime." The truth spilled out then, not from Caleb, he still hadn't spoken, but from the general's lips. How Caleb had been part of an elite unit in Vietnam. How his squad had been ambushed in the dead of night, outnumbered and outgunned. How Caleb had dragged 3 wounded soldiers through enemy fire to safety, refusing to leave them behind even as bullets tore through the trees around them. How he had been awarded medals for bravery, medals that now sat folded in a drawer at home, untouched for years. How he had come home to a country that didn't understand what he had survived, and how, instead of demanding recognition, he had chosen silence. A quiet life. A job where he could serve in a different way, cleaning up after kids who would never know his story. The gymnasium was so quiet you could hear the rustle of fabric as students shifted in their seats. One by one, they stood not to clap, not to cheer, but to salute. Hands rose, some shaky, some unsure, but all of them lifted in silent respect for the man they had ignored for years. Caleb didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just stood there, his old shoulders straight for the first time in a long while, and gave the smallest nod. "Some stories don't need telling," he said finally, his voice rough but steady. "Some battles aren't fought with words." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Students who had once tossed trash at his feet now held doors open for him. Teachers who had never learned his name approached him with hesitant apologies. The principal offered to hang a plaque in his honor, but Caleb just shook his head. The next morning, he was back at Roosevelt High before dawn, mop in hand, moving through the quiet halls like he always had. The only difference? Now, when students passed him in the hallway, they didn't look away. They met his eyes, and some of them even smiled. He was invisible until respect made him impossible to ignore. If this story moved you, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Share it with someone who understands that heroes don't always wear capes sometimes. They wear janitor uniforms and carry stories too heavy to speak aloud. And if you believe in honoring the quiet warriors among us, subscribe. Because their stories deserve to be heard.